Happy Wednesday to you, Dog Nation. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harris Cherokee Casino and Resort. My name is Brandon Adams. We're going to have a fun show today. Mike Griffith is going to join us live from California, which means we record the show in the 10 o'clock hour. That means it's like 7-something local time there for Mr. Griffith. He is doing some great reporting out there in the Golden State here this week. We'll find out more about that when he joins us. Also, Mike drops a bomb last night on the pages of DawgNation.com involving former Clemson DB Derion Kendrick. We will talk about that off the top of the program. And on this show today, we will actually hear Kendrick in his own words discussing kind of his mindset here as he moves on to the next phase of his football life. Very revealing comments from a Clemson defensive back, former Clemson defensive back. A lot of Georgia fans would like to see at UGA. We'll tell you everything that's out there regarding that on today's show. So what do you say we get it started? DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harris Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Around here on this show, one of the rules I try to follow as much as anything else is not to take myself too seriously. I don't mind y'all poking fun at me for whatever it is you choose to do so, or even kind of poking fun at myself from time to time. And also, when it comes to not taking yourself too seriously, one of the things that we do is we're pretty honest around here. And honesty compels me to admit that one of the things I'm really attracted to on this show are rumors. And on the one hand, I like kind of telling you what the rumor mill says. On the other hand, you got to be a little bit careful about just sort of dragging every rumor mill, item onto the show because, we do have kind of a big platform here, big audience. You want to be careful what you kind of give voice to a little bit. But when it's possible to kind of have some fun by diving into the rumor mill, we're going to, we kind of enjoy doing that. Yesterday with Connor Riley on the show, he and I both were kind of chatting about the fact that when it comes to Georgia, maybe active in the transfer portal before the summer is done, hard not to notice there had been a lot of online chatter about former Clemson defensive back Darian Kendrick potentially being still in play for Georgia as a possible transfer. Then lo and behold, last night, pages of DawgNation.com, very interesting story from Mike Griffith, who, by the way, will join us later on the show today. Mike takes the rumor mill stuff on this a step further. Let me read you a couple of sentences here from Mike on DawgNation.com about a potential big ad for Georgia out of the transfer portal. What Mike writes is the Georgia football secondary might be adding another body in the form of former Clemson cornerback Darian Kendrick, who's expected to choose the Bulldogs coming out of the NCAA transfer portal on the heels of a first-team All-ACC season in 2020, obviously for Clemson. That is Mike Griffith. In that same story there at DawgNation.com, Mike does obviously address what is, to a degree, the elephant in the room when it comes to Kendrick, the fact that he's facing some charges stemming from like a weapons issue and some stuff like that up in his home state of South Carolina. But Mike says that those charges are expected to be dropped. So when Mike joins us here a little bit later on, we will find out a little bit more about that. But in addition to Mike's reporting on this and the other stuff that's been kind of out there, there is also a little bit today of Kendrick in his own words. And I don't mind telling you all this. I mean, obviously I look at Georgia's need at cornerback, and I've said before that if Georgia stands pat with what it has and gives its very talented players who've been waiting the wings a chance to shine more this upcoming year, I'd be kind of fine with that. In a way, that'd be a certain validation of those players by Jamal Adai, the brand new secondary coach, and Kirby Smart, who obviously loves secondary play and obviously has, a great eye for talent and all of that. If Georgia chooses to stay in pat, in addition, I should say, to the two transfers they've already brought in the secondary. So I don't know how quite they've stood pat here, but they've already brought in, obviously, Brandon Turnage and Tyke Smith. But if they were to stand pat from this point forward, then I think it says something about how Georgia feels about the cornerbacks that it has. And it's not necessarily an indictment or knock on those guys if Georgia looks to add somebody else here, because the one thing we understand is, as talented as these Georgia players are, experience still matters. It's one of those things the stat guys, the math folks around college football have been talking about, for quite some time, that when you look at, the best play from the best defensive secondaries, the ones who are getting passes broken up and converting those into turnovers and everything that goes along with that, that typically comes from experienced secondaries. Those are the ones who kind of get that done. So understanding all of that while I like the talent that Georgia has at the cornerback spot already, I've obviously, speaking as a fan here for a moment, been pretty curious to see, hey, is a guy who, as Mike wrote about Kendrick last night, all ACC performer. If you look at a lot of these 2022 early mock drafts, Kendrick frequently shows up in the first rounds of these. I even saw one that had him as a top 10 pick. That's a pretty talented player. And obviously, I like talented players at Georgia, so I've been pretty curious to see. Maybe Darian Kendrick, does he land at a place like UGA eventually? As I said before, there's new developments in all of this because we actually get a chance to hear Darian Kendrick in his own words. He was a recent guest on a podcast. It's one of the guys is Skiggy. That's one of the guys on the show. That's a guy that went to high school with, kind of grew up with. And so Darian Kendrick is a guest on this podcast, and he talks about a number of things, including the timeline for when he might make a decision, when we might get a chance to hear where Darian Kendrick's going. Kendrick says if he's in the right frame of mind, that decision from the former Clemson defensive back may come sooner rather than later. This, Darian Kendrick in his own words here.
Yeah, I might see something out there soon about me going somewhere. It depends on how I'm feeling. But most likely, y'all are. I'm gonna make sure all my supporters and stuff, man. Yeah, all right. Where I'm going.
I want to give full credit to the show. This is On Campus with JB and Skiggy, I should say. On Campus with JB and Skiggy. That's the name of the podcast that Darian Kendrick makes an appearance on. You hear him right there saying, hey, you may be hearing something soon on this if he decides that's exactly what he wants to do. He does, though, in the midst of this discussion. I'm going to put a link to this when I post the full show at DawgNation.com later on today, because it's like an hour-long interview. It's worth hearing. Kendrick gets into a lot of stuff, including, as I said before, one of the issues that would seem to be kind of standing in the way of him landing at a place like Georgia are some off-field concerns. The fact that he was seemingly dismissed from the Clemson team. That was described as a mutual decision by Dabo Swinney. There's also some criminal charges kind of hanging over his head, at least for a moment. One of the hosts on the show asked Kendrick directly about, what he thinks about the fact that all of a sudden now there are people in the media amongst the world of college football fans, or just, random people who are following the story, that all of a sudden kind of view Kendrick as being a guy who has some character concerns. And Kendrick didn't hold back on talking about what it is that he feels like he knows about his own situation that maybe other people don't. More from Darian Kendrick from the JB and Skiggy On Campus podcast.
My son had some problems going on, so I was with him. I wasn't really at school. It was like during springtime, so I had a lot going on then. So I was with him. Wasn't really doing work. Couldn't really do work because I was always in the hospital. They had going to the hospital back and forth. So that's one thing. And then having them, and then having, you feel me, all this extra going around in my city where I have to come back to see them. Like, everybody got to protect themselves. Like, it ain't nothing against nobody. Like, everybody got to protect themselves. You don't know what's going to happen at what time. I don't care who you is, what your name is, none of that. Like, you can be the smallest person in the city. Nobody knows you. Something can still happen to you. So, it's always, you got to be aware of your surroundings and what's going on around you. It's not really trying to, you feel me? Like trying to act somebody unite. It's just, you got something to live for.
It's not necessarily clear what Kendrick means by the second half of that quote, but the first half of the quote, as far as what led him to maybe, kind of fall out of favor there at Clemson, as he describes his own son. Kendrick is the father of two, according to this podcast interview, apparently dealing with some health concerns there. He mentions, visiting him in the hospital. And one of the things that Kendrick also said in this same interview is that one of the things that he wishes he would have done differently during his time at Clemson was maybe be a little bit better communicator with Dabo Swinney about some of the things that was going on, that were going on in his personal life. He wishes he maybe would have addressed that with Swinney a little bit more openly and directly. It sounds like, on the basis of what Kendrick says in that comment there, but also some of the other stuff, that he sort of wishes that he had a better line of communication with the Clemson coaches. And I think he's taking some ownership for his own role and maybe not making them fully aware of everything that was going on with him, some challenges in his hometown, including the, some health issues for his own son there. However, even in light of all of that, ultimately what led to Kendrick no longer being on the Clemson roster, it certainly sounds like there's no bad blood on Kendrick's side with Dabo Swinney. We've heard Swinney also refrain from saying anything negative about Kendrick there as well. Truly, it seems like they've kind of parted on good terms through all of this, which is important to note for Georgia or anybody else who might be considering Kendrick here in the transfer portal. And in fact, in this same interview, Kendrick really had nothing but good things to say about his time working with Dabo Swinney.
I give a highly thanks to Dabo, just like believing in me. Like while I was there, always been on me, trying to get me better. do better in everything, even if it was off the field, on the field. And just like everybody around me, like just pulling for me, even if I was down, just pulling for me. So that's like, I played like, come on now, you got to play with people like that. You got to play for people like that. That's why I play with so much passion. Like people around me, like I play with so much passion in the game because I want to play for them. If they there for me, I play for them.
So obviously a pretty mature perspective on the part of Kendrick, feeling good about Dabo Swinney, appreciative of his time with him, even though it maybe doesn't quite end on the terms that he would have liked for it to end on. Obviously, Kendrick feels like he was well supported by Dabo Swinney during his time at Clemson. One more thing on this before we kind of change the subject and move on here. Another thing that's kind of out there when it comes to Darian Kendrick, the former Clemson defensive back, all ACC level performer, potential first-round pick in the upcoming NFL draft as he gets ready to transfer, is the moment that most people saw from Kendrick that probably stands out more so than anything else from his season last year at Clemson a year ago, even though he was all ACC during his regular season, did not have a good game, was beaten on some big passing plays against Ohio State in the college football playoff. And this may be among the more interesting moments in this interview from the JB and Skiggy on campus podcast that Darian Kendrick was a guest of, longtime childhood friends of one of the hosts of this show. It comes up just like directly as like emphatic and, in plain, conversation as possible. The fact that Kendrick did not play well against Ohio State, and Kendrick kind of owned his role in what was for him a bad game on a big stage. Pretty interesting stuff here again. A little bit more from Darian Kendrick.
What was it like for you to only have your one bad game be on national television? How did that affect you mentally, and just to like have it happen on that stage after you've had such a great season?
I think everybody have a bad game. It's just like that. Everybody, whether it's basketball, you go 0 for 30. Whether it's football, you give up 3 touchdowns, you throw 3 picks, whatever. You drop 3 balls. Everybody do it. I don't care what they tell you. Deion, what? He done got bombed on before. So, like, bro, it's a part of the game, bro. Like, stuff happens, bro. Like, the only thing you can do is go clean it up. See what work on what you messed up on that exact play, or go watch them plays over and over. See what you got to do better. See what he did. See what the quarterback did. See, you feel me? See what you was reading on that play. Stuff like that.
So listen, I kind of like a guy kind of owning up to the fact, I didn't have a good game. Deion Sanders probably had a bad game before, too. He's obviously the gold standard when it comes to the cornerback position, so all I can do is kind of get back to work and learn from what happened and see if I can play better next time. I kind of like that answer there from Darian Kendrick, and I'm not going to lie to you. As a Georgia partisan here, someone who wants the best for UGA, obviously the chance that Georgia could be in the mix for a transfer like this certainly piques my attention. I'm watching a situation like this closely. Now, this is not one of those things where Georgia should be moving ahead at all costs, no matter what. And clearly, that's not what UGA is doing. They've got to vet Kendrick on the field. Can a guy who played this way in the ACC also play this way in the SEC? They've got to vet him off the field. What was it that led to his dismissal there at Clemson? What has Kendrick learned from that situation? You heard a little bit of his own words there, too. And then, obviously, whatever's kind of hanging over him in a legal sense from the state of South Carolina, can cooler heads prevail there, and can we kind of figure out some way to make better sense of what happened with all of that? That's the hard work that Georgia has to do in a situation like this. I have no doubt that Georgia's doing that on Kendrick and other players that maybe we've heard of, thought of, or maybe some players that we don't even know about yet. That's just kind of the job of modern college football here. So I think it's important to hear Kendrick in his own words. Good podcast interview there that gave you a chance to do that. Mike Griffith says that this is a situation that Kendrick could truly be on his way to UGA, and I'm like a lot of y'all, I'm kind of buckled my seatbelt here looking to see on this story what happens next. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. And glad to have with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio, noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. That means the Apple Player, the Spotify, Google. Some of you listen right there through SoundCloud. Some of you listen right there through as I said before, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really, really grateful to have you a part of the show, no matter how you get to us today. And a big thanks to our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort for making it all possible. This is a great place to get away to, and it's a great time to get away. The one thing that I do here when I talk to people just kind of in my own life right now, there is so much energy around travel right now, and people are thinking about road trips and kind of how they can get back out and just sort of experience the world in a way that maybe they haven't over the last year or so. Well, no better choice for this than Harris Cherokee Casino Resort or the Harris Cherokee Valley River property as well. Both just 2-hour drive from Atlanta. Both feature great casino gaming, delicious gourmet restaurants, world-class spa, really fun entertainment options around the properties. Sports gaming is now there. The wonderful, sports book is now open. You get a chance to place your sports wagers there at the Harris Cherokee Casino Resort property. So this is a great time, great chance for you to be there. Website to go to find out more about this and to become a Caesars Rewards member to get the most incentives for your travel. It's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That'll get you in touch with Harris Cherokee Casino Resort and all their great properties. And I hope you enjoy that as you make your travel there here upcoming summer and the time to come. Really good stuff going on at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort right now, and the Harris Cherokee Valley River there as well. All right, it's DawgNation Daily here today. We're going to get Mike Griffith coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And I do briefly want to mention this. We won't spend a ton of time on this, but I do want to briefly mention this. Nice clutch performance yesterday for the Diamond Dogs, getting what in a lot of cases, it was kind of a must-win situation. Certainly, Scott Strickland, the Georgia baseball coach, was treating this as must-win. Although, as we said on yesterday's show, D1 baseball kind of already had Georgia in the NCAA field. And Connor Riley was telling me before the show today that Baseball America essentially kind of had the same thing going on. So Georgia may have already been in the NCAA field before yesterday's SEC tournament win against LSU. But certainly, Georgia couldn't afford to kind of rest on its laurels on that. It wanted to make sure that it was fully entrenched and on its way to an NCAA regional. And so by beating one of the real, traditional powers in the SEC, LSU, would certainly seemingly give Georgia a much better chance on that. So good job there yesterday by Georgia getting that win. Moving on to the next game in the SEC tournament, they'll play today against Arkansas. So obviously tough task. The Hogs have been ranked number 1 in the country for a good portion of this year. You would expect big games in the SEC tournament. That's certainly what Arkansas provides here. But for Georgia, maybe not quite so must win anymore against the Hogs later on today. So we will see how that plays out, and then we'll look to see what happens for Georgia beyond that when it comes to its NCAA tournament situation once the field is announced. And, of course, don't forget, we're still a couple of days away from the softball super regional in Gainesville against the Florida Gators. That's going to be a big deal here later on this weekend, too. So a lot going on with spring sports here for the University of Georgia, and we will cover all of that with you. But for now, on what's going on with Darian Kendrick, on what's happening out in the state of California with some really interesting stuff related to JT Daniels' offseason, some other Georgia players there as well. Let's talk to Mike Griffith here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Good to have you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, we'll say hello to Mike Griffith, who is in the state of California right now. And, Mike, this kind of reminds me when I was out there for the Rose Bowl back in 2017, we were doing DawgNation Daily. We were out there for a full week. We were doing DawgNation Daily every single morning, 10 a.m., which meant 7 a.m. local time, which meant, I'm already pretty used to getting up pretty early anyway, but getting up out there, 5 a.m. Pacific to get ready for that show at 7 a.m. Pacific time. That Pacific time zone will take some life off of you if you're not quite used to it, right?
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of going to bed early and waking up early. You look at your alarm, like, wow, it's 4 o'clock. I'm ready to go. You're used to getting up at 7 for the DawgNation Daily call at 9 a.m. Get your clock going every day. I'm okay though. All's well. I'm rested. Spent some time out here. Chasing bulldogs. These guys, they're hard to locate. Those fields were kept under wraps. I didn't have an opportunity to catch any of them, but what I did have an opportunity to do was catch up to a lot of JT Daniels' posse and his high school coach, the people that played against him, DJ Ugalelele's coaching staff. And so it's been productive from the standpoint of really kind of getting an idea of where JT comes from here in this Irvine, California area that I'm in.
I want to talk to you more about that before we're done. Let me get a couple things before we get there. I was just mentioning the Diamond Dogs before that. Big win yesterday against LSU. Is it okay to exhale now, Mike? They got a win against Ole Miss, even though they didn't win the series. They did get a win against the Rebels to close out the regular season, get the win yesterday against LSU. Can UGA let its guard down now, feeling confident that it will be one of the teams heading to an NCAA regional once the tournament is announced, or is there more work to be done against Arkansas today in your mind?
Yeah, I never. You just never know who's going to be on those committees. BA, who's going to put you in? I mean, we saw that with the College Football Playoff Committee in 2018. These committees are made up of human beings. I'll tell you, in softball, there's a lot of really angry people. Here Georgia's hosting a regional and really shouldn't have been, losing 7 straight games, and then you got teams like Michigan and Oregon traveling across the country playing and getting eliminated. They're upset because that was a made-for-TV deal. Now the question is there enough blowback from that baseball goes, ooh, we better be careful. We better. But the SEC is so good in baseball. In the last 3 years, the SEC has gotten at least 8 teams in. I think last time they had a term of 10 teams. And Georgia's sitting. They were kind of right on the bubble. And I'll tell you, I hesitate to say it, but we got to get the facts out there. Georgia's 41 in the RPI. Georgia Tech's 42. Georgia Tech beat them twice head to head. I mean, you don't want it to come down to those 2 teams, because if we're being objective and we're sitting in a room and we're trying to choose between Georgia and Georgia Tech, and they played twice and Tech won both of them, you're going to go with Tech. So you hate to think that a couple of stupid midweek games, when you're not even throwing your 1, 2, or 3 pitcher, could be the determining factor. I'll tell you what, I'll feel a lot better if Georgia can beat the number 1 team in the country, Arkansas, today at 5:30. I think they're probably in, but I'll tell you what, I have seen stranger things happen.
I won't pretend to be an expert on this, but doesn't the committee, the media that covers the sport regularly, they value weekend performances more so than midweek performances, right? Don't you kind of grade on a curve on the midweek stuff because that's typically younger guys who are pitching for you?
Absolutely. But again, when I'm sitting here looking at the RPI rankings and I see Georgia 41 and Georgia Tech 42, and you're looking at those at-large teams, one of the things you're going to look at is the RPI rankings. Again, it's just one measure, and certainly Georgia's got a good resume from the standpoint of taking 2 out of 3 on the road against Vanderbilt. They did take 1 on the road against Arkansas. They didn't get swept in any series this season. They kind of faded towards the end of the year. They're down 4. Their 4 best pitchers are out, and that's tough. Nobody wants to hear about injuries, but it's part of it. And they're down 4 pitchers. Their best hitter, the Oconee County kid, Connor Tate. I think Cole's still in the lineup, but he's out. The guy with leading home run lead. And if you're on the committee, do you look at that? Do you go, well, Georgia's good, but they're 4 pitchers down in their power. So that's why I say, yes, they do value the weekend series more. And yes, Scott Strickland, the Georgia baseball coach, I spoke to him Sunday morning, and he felt like the game against LSU was a play-in. LSU was a 23 RPI. They also had 13 conference wins. They carry a little bit more weight in terms of that traditional name, LSU. That's the New York Yankees of college baseball there. Granted, they've been down. But, again, I think Georgia's probably in. But I think you've got to look at some of these other factors and go, boy, I'm still not 100%. I'm at about 80%, Brandon.
Interesting stuff. So you dropped a pretty big bomb last night on the page of DawgNation.com. You're reporting that Darian Kendrick, former Clemson defensive back, is expected to transfer to Georgia, and that the criminal charges that he's currently facing in the state of South Carolina, involving, in one case involving a weapon, that these are expected to be dropped there as well. What more can you tell us about this situation, Mike?
Yeah, so it's a lot of expected, right? Expected, and people always, why don't you wait? Well, because people are talking. There's a lot of optimism out of the Kendrick camp, and he's leaning Georgia's way, and a misdemeanor charge for having a gun sitting in his lap while he was sleeping in a car, and small amount of marijuana. That was a citation. That's what happened. Back March 12th. He had already been dismissed from the Clemson football team. Dabo Sweeney had commented on that. We've got that story up. You can see that Dabo's press conference. We were on that Zoom call on March 1st with Dabo when he talked about Kendrick, when he talked about the Tigers and the new fresh shade of orange that we're going to see from Clemson. But this is a guy that could start. I don't know. Does he? Again, this hasn't happened yet. I want to be clear on this. Georgia's positioned, as the headline says, they're positioned to get Kendrick, provided that things get taken care of in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and this kid gets a second chance. That's got to happen first, okay? Once that happens, Georgia's in position to get Kendrick, and he's in position to compete right away. And again, no guarantees, because, Brandon, I think you were bullish on Amir Speed at the start of spring, and he did indeed have a very good spring. We know that Jalen Kimber probably had the best spring, and we know that Keely Ringo still isn't really ready. We know Turnage from Alabama is a guy who's got a couple years in his system that's very similar to Georgia, was a talented guy, was a 101 recruit, something like that. But I think Kendrick would be a guy that would really push for a starting spot, provided all the boxes get checked, and he's on the Georgia campus next week when those kids report for their off-season voluntary workout on June 2nd.
Yeah, I mean, here's my thing on this. I won't pretend to be we did hear a little bit from Darian Kendrick, his own words, off the top of our show today, but I won't pretend to be an expert on anything that he's dealt with in his personal life, on the field, off the field, or anything else. I am a little bit more comfortable making the evaluation as a player, and when you go into the transfer portal looking for someone who does have all conference credentials, even if it comes out of the ACC, someone who does have early mock draft nods for the first round, even though early mock drafts are typically pretty undependable, even with all of that, I mean, I think you're led to believe that, wow, from a credential standpoint at a position of need, it'd be hard to find someone who has better credentials than what Kendrick could bring to the table for Georgia if Georgia feels comfortable adding him to its roster.
Yeah, that's the whole key, is the chemistry part, and that's where Kirby has to do his due diligence, and I'm sure has, as far as, what does this do to the locker room? How is he received? What type of player, is he in terms of, off the field, in the locker room, with the chemistry? Because you got a championship team. You're trying to win the chili cook-off here, Brandon. You're trying to win the chili cook-off, and you're adding another ingredient here. And you don't want too much hot pepper or too much spice, right? You still want to keep that Georgia flavor. So every time you add to that chili cook-off mix, you got to know what you're putting in the stew. And Kendrick is certainly could be a key ingredient to the championship, but you just got to make sure that he mixes well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, you've certainly mixed in well in the state of California. That's where you've been over the course of the last couple of days, getting to know some of the people who know Georgia quarterback JT Daniels well. Just kind of give us an idea of some of what's been going out there and what you've learned about Daniels and learned about UGA while you're out there in the Golden State.
Well, I mean, Georgia's in the same conversation. First of all, I went to Bosco, St. John Bosco, and them in modern day. I mean, when they play each other, the best time they played each other, I think it was 54 FBS players on the field. I mean, this is just stupid numbers. You can only have 22 on the field at a time. But between those two rosters, 54 Division I players. So these are powerhouse private school programs in Southern California in the well-known Trinity League. When I talk about modern day, we're talking about guys like Matt Barkley, Matt Leinart, Colt Brennan played there as well, Bryce Young and JT, and that's just in the last 20 years. And in Bosco, Josh Rosen played there, and of course DJ Uangalele played there. And so I was over there to talk to them about DJ, and also over there to talk to them about playing against JT. Their defensive coordinator, a guy named Chris King, I thought this was pretty interesting. He used to work Alabama's camps back when coaches were allowed to do that. So he got very familiar with Kirby and Nick Saban going to the Alabama camps and learning their defense, learning that mid front that we've written about. And there's a video out there of Kirby and Glenn Schumann talking about their mid front and how Georgia kind of breaks it down with this match zone concept that both them and Alabama and also Clemson plays, by the way. So King was telling me a lot about being at Alabama. He's come to Georgia and visited a couple of times. With the Georgia staff. They let him through the door. When you produce that many D1 prospects, those coaching staffs have no problem inviting you on their campus, into their think tank to ask questions because Bosco runs the same defense that Alabama and Georgia does. So, right there is a little nugget of information. When JT plays Alabama, he's already seen that defense 5 times, every time he played Bosco. So he's got a concept, and he sees it in practice as well. It's what Georgia does as well. So, pretty fascinating to hear what they had to say about Georgia and Alabama behind closed doors, what it's like, how helpful Kirby and Nick are, this concept, this defensive principle they believe is their winning edge. They won a national championship in high school football 2019. They believe it's because they're playing this defense that Alabama and Georgia played. This is next level stuff. So that was one thing. And the other thing I picked up on was that Clemson also runs this defense. They don't run as much of the same defense as Alabama and Georgia, but they have that base package. So if you do get a guy like Kendrick, what Kirby does with the match zone is not going to be foreign to him. So we think about Alabama and Georgia being quite similar in defenses because they are. There's some differences. Kirby's kind of putting his spin on it. And we think, well, that's why turnage makes sense. But now you see why Kendrick might make sense, too. I don't know about the verbiage. I don't think the verbiage is the same at Clemson, but a lot of the same principles. So you learn a lot about the innards of Georgia when you talk with these coaches that have done the clinics, that have done the camps, and that have been in the think tank with the Georgia and Alabama staffs.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, Mike. I appreciate the work that you're doing to shed light on all of this. I know you've got some great stuff coming up in the days to come there at DawgNation.com as well. So thank you so much for being with us, and we will look forward to getting a chance to chat with you very soon, back when you're on this side of the country again.
I look forward to it, B.A. Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Mike kind of threw me off there at the end a little bit when he used the word innards. He talked about the innards. That's kind of a gross word. I mean, it's an appropriate word, but I don't know. For some reason, that kind of threw me off there a little bit. But good stuff from Mike out there in California. Big reporting on Darian Kendrick, too. So we will see if all of that comes to fruition. But a very interesting story involving Kendrick that folks ought to read there at DawgNation.com. From Mike Griffith on all of that. Here's something else I can recommend for you there as well. You've been hearing me tell you about this. In fact, we were doing our DawgNation Days of Summer event at the Battery Atlanta last weekend. Folks were coming up to me and they were saying, hey, BA, tell me more about this Finnish long drink. Well, I can tell you about it because everybody that I have kind of turned on to this has loved it. In fact, there are some folks who saw me at the pool on Saturday, and they saw me there. If you're watching a video, you see the nice-looking blue can of the original, the traditional flavor. They saw me drinking that, and they're like, "BA, that's that Finnish long drink." I said, "You better believe it is." I'm having a good time with that at the pool and everywhere else I'm going here this year, and you'll like it there as well because, listen, there are 4 choices. Like I said, the blue can is the traditional. It's kind of like a grapefruit and gin type combination. It comes ready to drink right out of the can. There's also a strong version, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume, that comes in the black can. There's a 0-calorie version. There's a cranberry version. So it's like a good liquor kick to go along with great flavor. It's like a mixed drink that's ready to drink right out of the can. It kind of started in Finland back in the 1950s. The Summer Games were in Helsinki there, and it's kind of moved its way to the United States, and now it's here in the state of Georgia. And if you go to the website, thelongdrink.com, that's the website, thelongdrink.com, you can find out where to get it close to you. So there's all kinds of stores, bars, it's big in Athens, all over the place, but you want to kind of find out where it is. So check that out online, thelongdrink.com. You can learn a lot more about the Finnish long drink. Ready to drink right out of the can, tastes great. So much fun here this time of year, so make sure you enjoy all of that. Also, a couple of SEC through stories to get to for you here today. And then coming up in a couple of minutes, also some really interesting stuff related to more praise for Georgia here this offseason, but specifically, there's something that I wish the national, kind of opinion tastemakers around college football would truly notice about UGA. So we'll get to that coming up in just a couple of minutes' time here. But before that, though, Auburn coach Brian Harsin, doing like a lot of coaches do this time of year, he's making his kind of rubber chicken circuit tour, booster club type thing, and openly acknowledging at a recent, appearance with some Auburn boosters that, yes, there will be a quarterback competition ongoing now between T.J. Finley, the recent LSU transfer, and obviously Bo Nix, who has been the entrenched starter. And I guess one of the things I'd be curious about kind of peering in on this, and by the way, we'll talk more about this and more this afternoon today, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for SEC Country Live on the SEC Country Facebook and SEC Country Live YouTube pages. Looking forward to doing that with you this afternoon. But I'm kind of curious to see, for Harsin, who's a brand new coach, who did not recruit Bo Nix, how much freedom is there knowing that Nix is a famous last name around the Auburn program? This is a guy that's got that kind of legacy heritage there. Does Harsin have full freedom to make the quarterback change if he wants to? If he wants to go to Finley instead of Nix, is there any kind of like political buffer that prevents him from being able to do that? I am curious about that. Now, there's also a chance that Finley, who was essentially beaten out by Max Johnson at LSU, will also be beaten out by Bo Nix once again here at Auburn. But that's an interesting quarterback competition to watch. And I was thinking about this in my mind a little bit. Where are the legit quarterback competitions in the SEC right now? Obviously, you'd say Auburn here, I think, now. There's clearly one at LSU. And I don't really think I know how that one's going to play out, although it seems like that's a two-horse race right now between Miles Brennan and, as I said before, Max Johnson. Clearly wide open quarterback situation at Tennessee. I wonder if when Florida practice starts, if, Dan Mullen finally starts saying more complimentary things about Emory Jones again, if he fully takes that over, or do we hear even any kind of whispers about the idea of a quarterback competition still ongoing at Florida with a guy like Anthony Richardson moving in to compete with Emory Jones, or if Jones clearly salts all that away. I think we have been in a quarterback competition scenario in College Station when it comes to Texas A&M. At this point in time, I do think Hayes King has probably gotten the edge there over Zach Calzada. Maybe Calzada makes a run later on this summer. I mean, there's open situation in Arkansas. That matters because that's who Georgia's getting ready to play. Although, that's probably a little bit less top of mind than some of the others that we're dealing with. But I guess you can kind of throw Auburn into the mix here of quarterback competitions around the SEC. Also, this is not necessarily news, but I think it was interesting. There's a guy named James Light who always shares these coaching quotes and things like that when it comes to, he appears at a lot of, coaching clinics, things like that. A lot of those coaching clinic videos that get shared, and sometimes we'll play them on the show. A lot of that stuff comes from the guy, James Light. He also shared a quote in print from Nick Saban that I thought was really interesting. And I guess in reading this, I was kind of left to wonder, and we just talked a lot about Georgia defensive backs and how a guy like Darian Kendrick could fit into all that. Brandon Turnage are just arriving, how he's going to fit into all that. Tyke Smith, transfer over from West Virginia, who you kind of hope is a plug-and-play player. This quote from Saban kind of speaks to the ways in which chemistry matters for your defensive backs, specifically chemistry in terms of communication on the field. Let me read this to you. So Saban's speaking at one of these coaching clinics, and here's what he says. He says, communication is critical in the defensive secondary. Saban goes on to say, even if you communicate the wrong thing, now this is interesting. He says, even if you communicate the wrong thing, if everybody does it wrong, it's right. Does that make sense, Saban asks? He says, it sounds backwards. We're supposed to be playing cover 2 and everybody plays cover 3. We're fine, he says. He says, you only get in trouble when one guy is doing the wrong thing. As long as everybody does the wrong thing together, you're still in a defense that might work in that given situation. You just can't have one guy off the page, one guy not working the way that he's supposed to work. And actually, I think that's pretty good insight. I mean, I get the impression that Saban, even though he does not like revealing a lot of himself to the media, I get the impression that Saban is pretty good in these coaching clinic type situations, willing to reveal a lot of what has made him a brilliant coach over the years. And this, I think, is a pretty good example of that there as well. And the reason why I think this might be a little bit relevant for Georgia is, when you do bring these new defensive backs in together, and whether it's a combination of guys who've been on the roster who emerge as the starters playing the most, or a combination of the transfers that you've just brought in, transfer you still might bring in, who ends up playing a lot for the Georgia secondary, how well do they gel with each other so that they do have open communication on the field, all kind of working together as a unit together on the field, finding a way to establish that chemistry with each other here over the course of this offseason, I think is really crucial there for Georgia. It's not just about new guys, whether they be incoming freshmen or recent transfers learning the system. It's also about these guys getting acquainted with each other and developing that bond that does allow them to communicate well together on the field. I think that's important, and good stuff from Saban there will make that your SEC through. And I do want to turn our attention back to the Georgia Bulldogs here, and we'll do that just in a moment. But let me also quickly remind you about my friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Equipping your house with energy-efficient windows and doors, setting up a free, no-pressure, easy consultation. They'll walk you through your installation options. They'll talk to you about all the choices that you can make when it comes to Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They'll explain all that in a really good, easy-to-understand way. Of course, Pella's got a lot going for it. It's a nationally known company, which means you get unparalleled resources. It's also a locally owned, family-owned branch right here in Georgia, which means you get that unrivaled service there as well. It's one of the reasons why I feel so confident recommending Pella Window and Door of Georgia to you. I also love the great savings they're offering right now. Big time savings right now. You can currently get 10% off your entire project or 0% APR for 24 months. That's a great deal. So make sure you check that out. A couple different ways to get in touch. Give them a call, 678-638-1496. Number once again, 678-638-1496. Or go to pellaofga.com/DawgNation for more. One more time, that website, pellaofga.com/DawgNation for more on that. All right, I want to spend a couple of minutes on this. I saw where Chip Patterson, in a piece up at CBSSports.com, we had Chip on SEC Country Live last week, but in a piece up at CBSSports.com, was kind of talking about the things he's looking forward to for the upcoming season, and one of his big, bold predictions here is that Georgia's going to win its first SEC championship since 2017. He says, on paper, everything is elite for the Bulldogs, with an SEC title, 3 SEC crowns, 4 top 10 finishes the last 4 years. But he says each year removed from that 2017 season brings a little more pressure for Kirby Smart to return to the college football playoff. Most of us would not deny that's true, and it's nice to hear Chip saying that this could be the year that happens. Obviously, Georgia fans, many of them believe that there as well. I guess, though, here's the one thing I do wish we could kind of add as an addendum to this conversation. When we say, hey, Georgia needs to win the SEC again, hey, Georgia needs to get back to college football playoff again, as true as that is, I wish we could also acknowledge the fact that Georgia's path towards doing that is just much more difficult than most of the teams it's competing with for these scarce playoff spots. Don't take my word for this. Take Pro Football Focus for an example. I saw they had an updated preseason top 25, and they also have some percentages here. And who knows if these numbers are right or not, but we'll take their word for it for right now. Clemson, the number 2 team in their preseason top 25, they give a 58% chance of winning its conference, the ACC, better than half. Ohio State, the number 3 team in the Pro Football Focus preseason top 25, they give a 48% chance of winning their conference, the Big Ten. Oklahoma, who's 5th on this list, they give the Sooners a 60% chance of winning the Big 12. Georgia, by comparison, only has a 24% chance of winning the SEC. Alabama only has a 50% chance in the league there as well, even though they're the reigning national champion. Now, when you look at that, Georgia's chances about 1-4, whereas Oklahoma's chances nearly 2-3. Alabama, I should say Ohio State and Clemson, about 50-50. Obviously, we understand that's not because Georgia's a worse team necessarily. They just play in a more difficult league. So I kind of wish as we're having that conversation about kind of where Georgia ranks in all of this, I would love the conversation to more frequently kind of circle back to the idea of the challenge of doing that in the SEC is just a much more difficult task. By the way, as we wrap up here today on our program, very funny edition of our Golden Shoe today. It comes from our buddy Forestry Dog, and most people send their Golden Shoe submissions via Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Forestry Dog actually sends his via the comment section at DawgNation.com for our podcast cool down and everything else like that. To me, I don't know why I think it's so funny, but I do. He says this is the new statue that Florida has built. He says it's in honor of Marco Wilson and the shoe he threw 20 yards down the field during the LSU game at the Swamp in 2020, the LSU 37-34 win. It's a big golden shoe statue. For some reason, I think it's funny that he's got like flowery foliage coming out of the the back of the shoe where the foot would go. I think that's very funny from Forestry. He's pretty good on the social media and the edit, so good job by Forestry Dog there. By the way, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville here in just 157 days, gets a win over Florida. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video, time now for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Speaking of that cool down, R.S. Andrews can be trusted for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is how they take good care of you. And by the way, this time of year, it's clearly ACs that you're thinking about because it's hot. It's 100 degrees, 90s at least. So get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs if you're worried that it's not going to make its way through the season that's on its way. I know our buddy Jeff Santel's had R.S. Andrews out at his house this week. They've been taking good care of him, and they will take good care of you as well. Let's go to YouTube first. We'll take your comments. We'll kind of roll through anything you want to. And I've been a little shorter on the comments just the last couple of days. We've had a lot going on. I'm not saying we're going to go forever today, but we'll try to do a little bit more than we've done the last couple of days. So if I can find the show. Hold on one second. All right, hold on, y'all. Well, you'd think it'd be right here. Oh, Lord. What a disaster. All right, let's try this one more time. There we are. Now we find it. Thomas Tyson says, who's ready to see Lewis Cine unleash? You better believe that sounds like a lot of fun. Good stuff there. John Freeman wants to know if some of the haters of UGA in the comment section are going to come back if and when Georgia wins it all. They better. And I feel like some of them will. I feel like we have kind of like probably two distinctive groups within the kind of the so-called haters category. We have some stand-up, guys who absolutely take their medicine. We have a few others that might that might sneak out under the cover of darkness and hoping, that nobody notices. But some of our guys who are in here the kind of the most, Jordan from Clemson, G. Grace from Bama, they'll show up and take their medicine. I feel pretty confident about that. Some of these others, I'm not quite so sure of. Connor Graham says, if Darian Kendrick comes to UGA, do we expect someone to leave? I mean, I'm not going to say one way or another on any of that kind of stuff, but obviously we're always on guard for everything in this kind of transfer portal age. So I think you have to be on guard for everything all the time, but I certainly don't have any, specific intel that would lead me to believe that right now. Frank Patterson wants to start the black jersey chatter for Charlotte. Frank, as much as I love the pageantry of the black jerseys, it's going to be 100 degrees in Charlotte on September 4th. So my guess is Georgia's probably looking to steer, and I don't mean to be a wet blanket about this, but my guess is Georgia's probably not looking to bathe itself in black when it's going to be 100 degrees and, sun should still be shining at 7:30. My guess is Georgia might be trying to avoid that a little bit, but we'll see. Donnie Wilkerson says he does know a few of the troll fans that won't come back. There'll definitely be a couple of them. Brandon Griffin says young kids deserve a second chance. I think Kirby is good judge when it comes to their sincerity to do better. Brandon, I'm right there with you. We've talked about this a million times before, that I'm a huge believer in second chances. And frankly, I'm fairly, okay with third chances in some cases. I mean, I think the one thing that you do have to vet is there any attempt to learn from whatever went on, whether it be a serious issue, whether it be a, not quite so serious issue, experience alone is not going to make you better. Have you learned something from the experience that you've been through? And that's the thing that you've got to vet, right? Me saying, hey, I'm a big believer in second chances, that's not the same thing as saying, I don't care what you've done in your personal life, as long as you can play football, you got a spot on my team. That's not quite the same thing as that. Because obviously it is possible to have off-field concerns that would be just an anchor around a team, that slows it down and keeps it from being everything that you want it to be. You can mess up a locker room pretty easy if you have the wrong concoction of personalities in that locker room. So when I say I'm a big believer in second chances, and I do say that a lot, that's not synonymous with all I care about is how good of a player you are. What you do off the field is not my business. That's not quite the same thing as that. In this case, as you said, I think you got to trust Georgia to look at the sincerity of any player that it might consider, and for whatever they might be through. I mean, here's the thing you understand with the transfer portal. For every player who goes in the portal, there's going to be a reason why they're in the portal. Everything eventually kind of ends badly. Otherwise, it just wouldn't end. In other words, if everything was hunky-dory at the school that the player was at before, that player would likely just stay there and keep going. There's always going to be a reason for every player who ends up in the transfer portal, and it's the job of a coach, whether it be this name we're talking about right now or 1,000 other names we will talk about over the course of the next couple of years. It's the job of the coach to kind of dive into those reasons and say, knowing what I know, can I live with this? And, I do trust Georgia can get that done. Let's see. Oh, Connor Graham, this is a good take. Connor has a lot of good comments. He says, if Darian Kendrick were to come to Georgia, this is actually a really good opinion. He says, if Kendrick were to come to Georgia, Justin Ross versus Darian Kendrick in a one-on-one battle in that Georgia-Clemson game would be a bigger story than JT Daniels versus DJ Uiagalelei. That's a pretty good take. I'm not quite sure where I come on that, where I land on that, but I am here for that opinion, Connor. Very well stated. Yeah, Robert, I don't quite see this quite as cut and dry as you do. I'm just, listen, and you can criticize me for this if you want to. I'm just very slow to condemn, and I don't mind continuing to be that way. Richard Dees, by the way, said that he's definitely got some Bama fans on, his version of Speed Post message when we beat them in the near future. Yeah, no doubt. There's going to be a lot of receipts, pulled back out if and when that eventually happens, Richard. That's good stuff. Let's see. Connor Graham says he'll be the hot takes guy. Yeah, he does a good job with that for sure. All right, let's see what else is going on. I'll try to go to the Facebook side of things here just for a moment. It's always an adventure trying to pull up these comment sections. Oh, boy. Always something. Here we go. And on we go. Looking for those Facebook comments here in just a moment. Hopefully we'll be there before noon. There we go. Now we go. Gerald Harmon says, beam me up, Kirby. Ro Hawkins says, who do you like to back up JT Daniels? I still think that's one of the most interesting things to happen this summer. And I guess it'll still be determined. And I guess at this point in time, you would look at Carson Beck as a legit factor in all of that. I continue to believe that early in the season, someone like Stetson Bennett, because he does have SEC experience, might be the most valuable commodity that you can put there. But over the course of the year, someone who's more likely to be a starting quarterback for you in 2022, either Beck or a Brock Vandagriff emerging as that number 2 over the course of the season is certainly something I hope to see happen. In some ways, this is a little bit like, to me, the battle there at left tackle, where the experienced guy may be your best option to begin the season against a team like Clemson. Salyer playing left tackle against Clemson, Bennett in that backup role early in the season. But as things go along, you'd like to see a younger player emerge there, an Amarius Mims or a Broderick Jones at left tackle. Salyer then moving back to guard, a future potential starter for you quarterback, Beck or Vandagriff surpassing a Stetson Bennett as time goes on, having the luxury to treat one of those guys as a backup and giving him the snaps that would kind of come with that role. That's what I'm kind of hoping for there, to at least to begin the year. You may be glad you've got Bennett's experience if something minor were to happen with JT Daniels, but eventually it'd be kind of nice to think that you have a quarterback succession plan in place as well. Chad Buchanan's calling on Carson Beck to be QB2, and he very well might be. Stephen Burton says, I truly believe JT's going to rip stuff up this year if we stay healthy. And Stephen's obviously right about that. Health is a concern. Georgia was lucky to be mostly healthy in 2017, the best year that it's had thus far in the Kirby Smart era. And, of course, more good health this year would be an example of that too. Josiah Hurd says maybe they should play shirts versus skins in the Georgia-Clemson game. Xavier Brown says, do you think the media is sleeping on our dogs? I really feel like we're going to shock the college football world. Boy, I hope that's true. I mean, I think that you see kind of a steady dose of people who are looking to pick Georgia. I mean, sometimes in the national championship conversation, Georgia kind of benefits from the media's bias, in favor of things that haven't quite happened yet. So Georgia gets a decent share of the predictions on the basis of, hey, watch out for Georgia this year. I don't want to pick Alabama to repeat. I don't want to pick Clemson to do it again. So it's more interesting then to pick Georgia. That's what some media members seemingly would seem to think. And so I think Georgia benefits from some of that. But there's also a little bit of fatigue with the fact that Georgia's going to have been kind of stuck in that sort of fifth best team in the country spot for a couple of years, it would appear. And so you kind of have a little bit of both of that going. You have almost parallel tracks where there are, some media members who seem to truly be really bullish on Georgia's chances and others who've kind of maybe sort of moved on to another darling. So obviously, Georgia making good on some of the predictions that are out there and vanquishing some of its critics, that'd be a nice thing to consider for the upcoming year. Orange Healy says early in the season we should have some blowouts to get snaps or backups. Yeah, you hope that. Last year you didn't have a ton of that because Georgia probably wasn't, quite good enough to blow out, too many teams, and they were also playing an SEC-only schedule. So more of a chance for traditional backup opportunities, especially at the quarterback spot. It'd be nice to be able to get that this year. Joe Moody would love to see Georgia and Oklahoma again. Yeah, Oklahoma's one of those teams I just have a little bit of a little bit of an issue with, right? Because whether you take Pro Football Focus seriously or not, I think their numbers sound about right, that a team out of the Big 12 that has about a 60% chance of winning that league, that's just a far different path to the college football playoff than a team like Georgia. And yet on all these lists, and this maybe goes back to the commenter a moment ago who said, are people sleeping on Georgia? What may be more true is people are sleeping on Smart in particular, because Lincoln Riley is heralded as a better coach than Kirby Smart in every one of these preseason top coaches lists. But how much of that is just on the basis of Oklahoma just simply plays in an easier league? I don't know, I sound like the biggest Georgia homer in the world when I say that, but just because I want it to be true doesn't mean that it's false. That there is a little bit of a harsh curve that a guy like Kirby Smart gets graded on sometimes, whereas guys like, Dabo out of the ACC, Ryan Day, in some years out of the Big Ten, other years it's tougher than others, and obviously, pillow soft Big 12, boy, a lot of those so-called genius coaches out of those leagues have a pretty easy path. Let's see what else. Donnie Wilkerson says he loves our coach. Jordan Bowman says if Darian Kendrick, or I guess DK as he likes to be known as, plays at Georgia, if he were to come to Georgia in a similar role that he's played in Clemson, he says he wouldn't be matched up too much one-on-one against Justin Ross. Johnny Lester says Oklahoma is soft. Can't disagree with that. However, the one thing I will give at least a little bit of credit on, and I do try to be, even though I have my own opinions, I try to be as objective as possible. Objectively speaking, one of the things that I will say is that Oklahoma quietly last season became much better on defense than they had been at any point in time in certainly the Lincoln Riley era. You probably have to go back to early days of Bob Stoops to find Oklahoma playing as well defensively as they did. In fact, when you kind of think about Oklahoma last year as one of these teams, a little bit like Georgia, that came on strong as the season went along, a lot of that for Oklahoma was defensive. They sacked quarterbacks a lot last year. I believe they had 40-something sacks, I think. And in a short year, they were certainly like top 3, top 4 in the country. They were near the top of the country in sacks a year ago. They kind of got after quarterbacks a little bit more last year than they had. So that's actually one of the bigger stories for me for this upcoming year. You expect Rattler to be a good quarterback. You expect Oklahoma to move the football, score points. Eric Gray, the Tennessee transfer at running back, I think he's an interesting factor in that offensive situation there too. Oklahoma scoring, you expect that to happen. But last year they showed a glimpse of actually being a better defense. And so, I would typically join Johnny in his comment there that Oklahoma soft. I have thought that about them. And I'm not saying, a few performances at the end of a season when Oklahoma was all but eliminated from playoff discussion. I'm not saying that ought to change your opinion of how soft or not soft they are, but it certainly sets up a moment and an opportunity for Oklahoma to maybe kind of correct the opinion that's out there of them, that they are kind of a soft, two-hand touch, 7-on-7 style team that scores points but doesn't really stop anybody. This is their chance to kind of change that, and the events of the end of last season would lead you to believe that's a possibility. Bill Shirley mentioning Jaden Hazelwood. I actually think Hazelwood's probably set up for a pretty big year there at Oklahoma. I may be wrong about that, but I feel like I see him show up in some of their social media stuff. So I feel like he's been hurt, but I think he's back. I'm actually assuming that Jaden has a decent-sized year for them. All right, let's see what else. Brandon Griffin says Washington, Burton, Jackson, all experience and all go-to players. He says he also got the young bucks chomping at the bit to make an impact. I think that's all really good. I still kind of reminds me of the other day. Who was it we had on the show? Oh no, it was I guess it was Mark Webb when he used the phrase young buck during an interview, but then corrected himself because he assumed that I wouldn't know what young buck meant. That was kind of funny. Good stuff from Mark Webb recently on the show. Frank Patterson says, who switches sides faster, Darian Kendrick or Matt Rukavine? That's just funny. I don't care who you are. That's just funny. All right. A little bit more on the Facebook side of things. Naturally, I got out of the comments. Let me see if I can get back in here. A little bit of an adventure today with these comments, and I apologize for that. All right. Randy Hall says, a chortle when Kendrick comes to UGA. That could very well be chortle worthy, Randy. I could definitely see that. Gerald Harmon says Spencer Rattler's trying to be Patrick Mahomes. Maybe so. Matt Rukavina laughing at the comment from YouTube. Xavier Brown says, anyone notice we haven't heard much from Dan Mullen lately? Xavier, we talked about this in the show the other day. Compared to exactly a year ago, it is way quieter in the Florida front. It's just really amazing how much quieter it is in Gainesville. They're not saying anything. Now, maybe they're like, we're going to sneak up on people, or maybe they just know they're not very good. But, it's crazy how quiet it is. Like, I mean, I'm even trying to think, like, the last, like, sort of big media thing I've even heard related to Florida or somebody from Florida talking. And this is the defending champion of the – like, nothing says this is how the media works better than the media couldn't talk enough about Florida before it won the SEC East, but now that it has won the SEC East, they're dying to talk about something else other than Florida. That's really interesting to me, So I'm right there with you. It's amazing how quiet it's been in Gainesville thus far this offseason. All right, let's see what else. Randy Hall says, did Phil's win inspire you to play more golf? You better believe it did. I'm a big Phil Mickelson fan. A lot of times the reason why I wear, like, my preference for, like, DawgNation gear and Georgia gear is the black. A lot of that is, sounds dorky, but it's a little bit of an homage to Phil Mickelson. I'm a big Mickelson fan. I actually played golf yesterday. I had a great time. One of our buddies, Bob Zamblin, had Jeff and me and our buddy BJ Sweeney from kind of behind the scenes here at DawgNation. Had a great round yesterday. Beautiful course, great day. So yeah, this is the year of BA. This is the when it comes to golf. This may be the year of BA. I'm excited about that. Steve Highland predicts those lousy, stinking Gators to be a 5-loss team. I like the idea of that. All right, one more comment. We're gonna get ready to go. Let's see what else is going on here. All right, let's see what else. Donnie Wilkerson says, I still like Bama winning it all this year. I mean, the one thing you can't deny is Alabama's obviously a formidable foe. You can't pretend that's not the case. G. Greg's Bama boy says he's a little bit worried about the Clemson running backs. I can't lie. Donnie Wilkerson says Florida has no chance of beating Alabama. Yeah, I mean, Alabama's essentially about a 2-touchdown favorite on the road right now. That's one of the reasons why you don't hear much about Florida is, in addition to losing a lot of talent off last year's team, they are also, facing a little tougher schedule than they've oftentimes played. Their SEC West opponents are LSU and Alabama. That's pretty tough. All right, we're going to get ready to go for now. Really good stuff. Thanks for being here today as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Of course, make sure you check them out online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Also, make sure you check out the AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, online at ajc.com. There's a lot going on in the sports world right now. Braves starting to get hot, getting above 500 here. You love to see that. Also, Game 2 from Madison Square Garden tonight with the Hawks and Knicks. A lot of energy around the series right now. Very strange comments from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio related to Trae Young. I don't care who you vote for. There's nothing worse when a politician tries too hard to kind of fit into a sports conversation. And I literally don't care who you vote for. That's on both sides of the aisle. De Blasio, the latest example of that when it comes to Trae Young. So, but Trae's game winner from Game 1 got folks talking there in New York City. Really good coverage, ajc.com, about all of that. Also, e-paper special Thursday morning coverage of what happens in Game 2 as the Hawks look to take another one there on the road, and then I'll come back home after that. Of course, the other big story is, and I guess we now know, and I promise we're going off the air, so the Julio Jones thing the other day from FS1, apparently he did not know he was on the air when he said what he said. Now, that doesn't change the veracity of his point that he expects to be gone from Atlanta. But, you can't be putting people on the air and not have them know they're on the air. That is very different. That is that's an FCC violation. Like, that's not the same thing as, Georgia's a one-party consent state when it comes to, like, recording a conversation. But broadcast is a totally different ballgame. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to FS1 throughout all of this. But beyond that, obviously, the Falcons' bigger issue is, what life after Julio Jones looks like if he indeed is on the move here. Michael Cunningham's got a really good column up about that at ajc.com there as well. Also, getting ready for Memorial Day weekend. Always a lot of fun stuff going on with that. Certainly appreciate you being here with us for our show, but checking out all of this, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, online at ajc.com. R.S. Andrews Cool Down, online, rsandrews.com. Get your air conditioning tuned up. Stay cool this summer. Don't let that thing go bad on you. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Great day. See you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll talk to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.